I thought I knew every inch of my husband's life until a stranger at the grocery store called him Dad. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in aisle 7 of the Safeway in Portland, Oregon, her hand still gripping a box of cereal as she watched her husband Mark embrace a teenage girl who had just run up to him with pure joy in her eyes. Mark's face went white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, and Sarah felt the ground beneath her shift as the girl, maybe 16, with Mark's same green eyes and dimpled chin, wrapped her arms around him and said, "Dad, I didn't know you shopped here too." The words hung in the fluorescent-lit air like poison, and Sarah's mind raced through 15 years of marriage, 15 years of believing she knew this man who shared her bed, who kissed her goodbye every morning, who had held her through 2 miscarriages and promised her they'd keep trying for the family they both wanted. Mark stammered something about this being a misunderstanding, but the girl looked confused, then hurt, and an older woman, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a worn jacket, appeared at the end of the aisle, her face draining of color when she saw Mark standing there with Sarah. "Mark?" the woman whispered, and Sarah heard her entire world crack in that single syllable. The woman's name was Jennifer, and as Sarah would learn in the devastating hours that followed, she had been Mark's girlfriend since college, the mother of his 2 children, the 16-year-old girl named Emma and a 13-year-old son named Jake, and she had believed for 15 years that Mark was a long-haul truck driver who was gone for weeks at a time, just as Sarah had believed Mark was a regional sales manager who traveled constantly for work. Sarah's hands shook as she sat in her car in the parking lot, Mark pleading through the window, trying to explain the unexplainable, and she realized that every business trip, every late night, every weekend conference had been a carefully constructed lie, a double life so meticulously planned that neither family had ever suspected. She drove to her sister's house in Beaverton, her vision blurred with tears, and spent the night piecing together the clues she had missed, the separate bank account he claimed was for investment purposes, the second cell phone he said was for work, the way he never wanted to take vacations during summer break or around major holidays. Jennifer called her the next day, her voice broken and raw, and they met at a coffee shop on Hawthorne Street, 2 women who had loved the same man, who had built their lives around someone who had never truly belonged to either of them. Jennifer showed her photos, birthday parties and Christmas mornings, soccer games and school plays, and Sarah saw Mark's face in every picture, the same smile he gave her, the same tenderness in his eyes, and she felt sick knowing that love could be divided and distributed like some kind of commodity. They compared stories, timelines, and discovered that Mark had been living in a rental house halfway between their 2 homes, a neutral zone where he kept separate sets of clothes, separate lives, separate versions of himself. Jennifer had worked night shifts as a nurse to support the family during Mark's long hauls, never questioning why he could never be reached during certain hours, why he always paid in cash, why he never wanted her to meet his family or friends. Sarah had her own career as a high school teacher, her own independence, and had never thought to question the man who seemed so devoted, so present during the times he was home. The betrayal wasn't just about the infidelity, it was about the systematic deception, the calculated manipulation, the way he had stolen years from both of them, years they could never reclaim. Sarah filed for divorce immediately, and Jennifer did too, and they discovered through lawyers that Mark had been taking out loans in both their names, had credit cards neither knew about, had built a financial house of cards that was now collapsing. The children were devastated. Emma and Jake had to learn that their father had another wife, another life, and Sarah had to grieve not just the loss of her marriage, but the loss of the children she had never known existed, the stepchildren she might have loved if given the chance. Mark tried to explain it away, claiming he had loved them both, that he had gotten trapped in the lie and didn't know how to escape, but his words were hollow, empty justifications for a choice he had made every single day for 15 years. Sarah found herself attending therapy sessions, trying to understand how she had missed the signs, how someone could compartmentalize their life so completely, and her therapist explained that people like Mark were master manipulators, skilled at reading emotions and telling each person exactly what they wanted to hear. She ran into Jennifer occasionally, at the courthouse, at the lawyer's office, and slowly, painfully, they formed an unlikely friendship, bonded by shared trauma and the need to make sense of the senseless. Jennifer discovered that Mark had a third bank account neither of them knew about, filled with money he had been siphoning from both households, apparently planning some kind of escape that never materialized. Emma reached out to Sarah through social media, a tentative message asking if they could talk, and Sarah's heart broke all over again as she read the girl's words, "I know this isn't your fault, and I'm sorry you got hurt too." They met for coffee, this girl who was almost an adult, who had Mark's eyes and his smile, but seemed to have none of his capacity for deception, and Sarah felt a strange maternal pull toward this child, who had been as much a victim as anyone else. Emma talked about how her father had missed so many important moments, how she had always felt like something was off but could never quite name it, and Sarah realized that Mark's betrayal had rippled outward, damaging everyone in its path. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Mark fought for assets he had no right to, made accusations and counter-accusations, tried to paint both women as unreasonable and vindictive, but the evidence was overwhelming, the paper trail too clear to dispute. Sarah learned that Mark had taken out a life insurance policy, naming a third woman as beneficiary, someone he had apparently been seeing casually for the past 2 years, and she wondered if there were other families, other lives she didn't know about. The day the divorce was finalized, Sarah stood outside the Multnomah County Courthouse, breathing in the cool Oregon air, feeling both liberated and lost, and Jennifer stood beside her, and they didn't say anything because there was nothing left to say. Sarah had to rebuild her identity, had to learn who she was outside of being Mark's wife, and she threw herself into her teaching, into her students, finding purpose in helping teenagers navigate their own complicated lives. She started dating again after a year, tentatively, carefully, always watching for red flags, always questioning, and she hated that Mark had stolen her ability to trust completely. Emma and Jake became part of her life in unexpected ways, birthday cards and occasional dinners, a relationship that existed outside of Mark's shadow, and Sarah felt a strange maternal pull toward these connections, even as they reminded her of everything she had lost. Jennifer moved to Seattle for a fresh start, and they kept in touch through texts and phone calls, two survivors of the same shipwreck, and Sarah realized that sometimes the most meaningful relationships come from the most painful circumstances. She heard through mutual acquaintances that Mark had moved to California, that he was working construction and living alone, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a vast emptiness where 15 years of her life used to be. Sarah started writing about her experience, first in a journal, then in essays that she shared online, and she was shocked by how many people reached out with similar stories, tales of double lives and secret families, and she realized that betrayal of this magnitude was more common than anyone wanted to admit. She spoke at support groups, helped other women navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of discovering their partner's deceptions, and found healing in turning her pain into purpose. On the anniversary of that day in the grocery store, Sarah drove to the coast, to Cannon Beach, and walked along the shore as the sun set over the Pacific, and she thought about all the versions of herself she had been: the naive wife, the devastated victim, the angry survivor, the healed woman, and she realized that she had become someone stronger than she ever thought possible. She thought about Emma and Jake, about Jennifer, about all the people whose lives had been shattered by one man's selfishness, and she felt a fierce protectiveness towards them all. Sarah had learned that love without honesty is just manipulation, that trust, once broken, can never be fully restored, that some betrayals are so profound they change the very fabric of who you are. She had learned that healing isn't linear, that some days she still felt the rage and grief as fresh as that first moment in the grocery store, and other days she felt grateful for the lessons, for the strength she had discovered, for the authentic life she was now building. She had learned that you can't truly know another person, that everyone has the capacity for deception, but that you can choose to live openly, honestly, refusing to let someone else's darkness dim your own light. As the waves crashed against the rocks and the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah made a promise to herself to never again ignore her instincts, to never again make herself small for someone else's comfort,